Cooper comes up, hits it. Yeah!
Oh my God! What a goal! What a goal by McFadden!
Dalglish. There's the goal! Richie!
Hello and welcome to the official Scotland podcast. We're here at Hampden Park in the museum, of course, which seems like a good place to take a trip down memory lane with our latest guest, who is, of course, Willie Miller. Willie, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
The obvious place to start seems right back at the beginning. Now, the reliable source that is Wikipedia, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, says that growing up, you weren't actually that interested in football and you actually played in goal. Is that true?
Yeah, when I was young, when I was at primary school, I was only introduced to football really, I think in the last year of primary school, and it was as a goalkeeper, so I was kind of a popped in goal. I don't think they could get anybody else to play that position. They all wanted to be strikers. So yeah, I played at primary school in goal, two teachers, Mr. Wright and Mr. Taylor. Wright and Taylor, that was the primary school teachers that first got me involved.
And that's here in Glasgow, isn't it?
That's here in Glasgow, yeah, in East End. Was born in Bridgeton, brought up there. Kilmarnock Primary School it was, and then John Street Secondary.
So where does the transition come then? When do you eventually throw the gloves to one side and move out?
I think it was, it was when I went to secondary school, and then it was a case, I was quite a tall kind of at that age, so I was then transformed into a magnificent striker, scoring loads of goals. Played for Glasgow Schools, both at striker and in the right wing, would you believe, as well. And kind of I developed my career as a striker before I went up to Aberdeen. In fact, I was taken up to Aberdeen as a free goal scoring striker, so I know that would surprise many people, but it's the truth.
Who's responsible for moving you back to the position you became famous for then?
It was Teddy Scott in the reserves at Aberdeen. When I went to Aberdeen, they farmed me out to Peterhead for a year, who were in the Highland League, and scored, I think it was 24 goals for them, and things were going okay, but when I moved back to Aberdeen, trying to get into the reserves at that time was a bit difficult, so I wasn't getting a game as a striker. Round about, I think it was November perhaps, of the first year, back trying to get into the reserves. And they didn't have any defenders, so Teddy Scott invited me to go back and play centre back. And the end of that season, I made my debut for Aberdeen as a striker. They played about with me in midfield, but then pretty soon they realised that centre back was a position that I was going to try to command, and the following season, I started the season in the League Cup as a centre back, and that's where I stayed. That's
quite a quick transition then. So by 75, I think you're 20 years old, you are the captain at Aberdeen, and you make your Scotland debut. Yeah. That's quite a significant year then, I would imagine, for you. It was,
yeah. I mean, it was a surprise getting the call for the first cap, to be perfectly honest. I was in the under-23s at the time, and we went to Romania. Willie Ormond was manager of the national team, and Jock Stein was the manager of the under-23s. And the reason that I got the call was because the Leeds team were playing in the European Cup final against Bayern Munich. And a couple of the players called off, one being Billy Bremner. So I actually made my debut for Scotland in midfield, taking over from Billy Bremner sitting in front of the two defenders in Romania. But it was a real shock to me, because at that time I was just trying to establish myself as an under-23 player, and looking forward, yeah, you hope to make your international debut, but at the time it was very surprising to me. But hey, you've got to start somewhere, and that's where I started.
That must be, a special time in a young player's career. What do you remember about the build up to the game, and then eventually when you make that debut?
Well, you're then getting in with the big boys, and you get in with the Leeds team in particular at that time were dominant, playing in the European Cup final. It's quite some achievement, although they didn't win it. the build-up was one of surprise, being told, first of all, by Jock Stein that Willie Ormond wanted to have a chat with me. And I was wondering what it was about, so we had the chat and he told me that he would like me to play in the midfield area because you know, a couple of the Leeds players hadn't turned up and they were looking for a little bit more defensive type midfielder. So I went into the game, you know, obviously enthusiastic about it. I remember crocking near star man and he got taken off. It was a total accident, believe me, it was a total accident. And we drew 1-1, I think it was, European Championships, and we didn't qualify for the Euros. And these days, the Euros were difficult to qualify from. I think there was 8 teams that qualified for the Championships in these days, so you had to be, you know, an exceptional team. Didn't qualify, and on the way home, I remember 1 or 2 of the armed guards asking where I was in the airport to have a word with me because I crocked to a star man. Total accident, no. But it was a great experience, and you know, it was a start of something that didn't really take fire until the early 80s, really. I think when we won the league with Aberdeen, I think that's when you began to get, you know, true recognition at international level. So I only had one other appearance, I think, in the 70s.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, it takes 3 years, I think, for your second cap, and then another 18 months for your third. So this notion that, you know, once you're in, that's you a Scotland player. Your story is a very different sort of progression, isn't it?
Yeah, it was. I think I sat on a few benches though as well. You know, I think I was there or thereabouts, and you know, maybe getting a nod and then being left out and sitting on a bench and, you know, trying to convince the manager that I was good enough. It was Ali MacLeod who was my club manager and then took over as Scotland manager. In '78 they named some standby players as well, so I was standby defender for the World Cup, although I hadn't played in any of the qualifying games. And it really, you know, it was a real struggle to get international caps for me. But I think, you know, once you start at club level, because you've got to remember in these days it was primarily Rangers, Celtic players and Anglo-Scots that got the nod. You know, provincial club players weren't really, you know, I don't think at that time given too much opportunity. That changed in the 80s. It changed with Aberdeen and Dundee United because, you know, we started winning trophies, won a league, European Cup Winners' Cup, so that gets you recognition. But the 70s were definitely a bit of a struggle to try and convince the manager that you were good enough.
You eventually do become a regular, like you say, in the 80s under Jock Stein. You get your one and only goal for Scotland, of course, around that time against Wales. Yeah. I mean, that must be a special moment. What do you remember about it? How do you look back on that?
I just remember it was a magnificent goal. No, it was actually. It was, I think, 2 or 3 1-2s and then slotted by the Welsh goalkeeper, Di Davis, I think it was, who was in goal that day. But it was probably the only time I was in the opposition half in my 65 caps to actually score. Because
100% record then, that's
I used to, you know, I was always the one that stayed back. You know, even at corners, I didn't go up for too many corners. Every now and again, I would get the nod to go up, but I was kind of used as the safety valve at the back. My teammate, of course, Alec McLeish, was up for every corner and every free
all
kick.
The glory.
And you know how many goals he got in his international career?
Tell us.
None.
There we go. Just shows
There you go.
Quality, not quantity.
I think did he have 76 caps? Yeah, I think he did. So
that, of course, was one of the British home internationals back then. Were you fond of those games? Is that something you think missing today, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, we always enjoyed that. We enjoyed coming up against, you know, Northern Ireland, Wales, and especially England. England was always a big fixture in these days, and it was always a real test coming up against the English. I mean, they probably hated us as much as we disliked them. And one England game in particular, the 1-0 victory down at Wembley, was again a big turning point, you know, for myself. And you know, English commentators didn't really know much about Aberdeen. They knew about Rangers and Celtic, but nothing about Aberdeen, a provincial club. So it was a bit of an opportunity for myself, Big Alec, to establish ourselves out with the borders of Scotland. And when you beat England at Wembley, then you get a bit more recognition. So it was all adding to, you know, the recognition that you really need to convince Scotland managers, Scotland fans, people out with the country that you're good enough to represent Scotland.
You must have taken great pride in the defensive performance that night as well. I mean, the 1-0 scoreline tells its own story. You not only get the victory but the clean sheet as well. But that must be an aspect of it that you look back on fondly.
Yeah, I believe, and you would have to check it, but I think there's only 2 occasions that Scotland have went to Wembley and come back with a clean sheet. And prior to us getting it in 80 or 81, I think it was something like the 30s, the last time Scotland went down and didn't lose a goal. So yeah, we looked upon that as very important, you know, both at club and international level, to try and keep clean sheets. And, you know, against a team as powerful and as strong as England, then that was treasured. Yeah,
I mean, that's 81, 82 rolls around. You've qualified for the World Cup, obviously a tremendous achievement. What do you remember about the qualification campaign, the process to get there?
Well, not a great deal. I remember one incident. We played Israel, yeah, I'm right in saying that, in the qualifying section. And I remember being left out and put on the bench over in Israel. And Jock Stein, for some reason, decided to leave me out. I'd been playing in the games prior to that, and I thought I was pretty much certain to get picked. But for some reason, they left me on the bench and played Kenny Burns at centre back. Now, and looking at Kenny Burns in training, my assessment of him, that he was overweight and unfit, and I wasn't happy when he got the nod in front of me. And I'm sitting on the bench, you know, in Tel Aviv, you know, in the searing heat, watching the defence getting ripped apart by Israel, and I'm thinking, why am I not out there? So they went in at half time, and I remember wee Jim McLean coming running out of the dugout, and I'm sitting on the bench. I don't think I did any warm-up because I was not in a good mood. And I came on in the second half, and Jock Stein actually moved Kenny Burns into midfield, and I came on and played beside Big Alec at the back. And of course we won 1-0. It was a corner and Big Alec flicked it on and Dalglish scored. So that was an important fixture for us to qualify, but it was a little bit bittersweet because I couldn't understand why I was left out, but I was delighted to get the nod at half time.
What was Jock Stein like for you as a manager? Understandably and deservedly so many stories, you know, about the man and what he was like. What about for you personally? How did you find him as a manager?
Well, initially I didn't like him because he didn't give me an opportunity to play in the international team, but then I really liked him because I think he gave me 50 plus caps. He must have done, yeah. I mean, the majority of my international career was played under Jock. You know, before Jock it was Ali McLeod, and after Andy Roxburgh. So it was Jock that gave me the majority of the caps. Now, it was looked upon, you know, and he was regarded very highly by everyone that played under him. You know, press, fans, players gave him respect. What he did at Celtic was just amazing, and that respect was shown to him throughout my international career by everybody. It was strong in discipline. It was an old style type of manager, and yeah, there was tactics, and you know, there was dossiers compiled, but nothing like the more modern type manager like Alec Ferguson, Jim McLean. So you didn't go into it in depth. I think he looked at players, he assessed players, and then he trusted players to go out and play. And that's basically what he asked me to do. He asked me to go out and give him what I was given to Alec Ferguson in Aberdeen, and he was happy with that, and I was delighted with it.
Absolutely. You mentioned missing out on the Israel game. When the tournament rolls around, of course, you missed the first game against New Zealand as well.
A sore point,
so
yeah.
How do you feel about missing out on that? I promise we'll get the sore points out the way and we'll move on to the happier stuff.
That was devastating, I'm afraid to say. You know, not being picked for the New Zealand game. Big Jock put in Alan Evans, and Alan Evans played with Aston Villa at the time, and they had just won the European Cup. So, you know, in a way you can kind of understand that, but I don't know how many caps Alan Evans got, but he didn't get many, and to play in a World Cup, you know, in front of me, who had been involved in the qualification campaign really upped me. It was a sore one to take. And of course we went out in goal difference, and yeah, I played my part obviously in the Russian game, me and Big Alan, but you lose 2 goals to New Zealand, which played its part as well. And I think if I was playing in that game, I don't think we'd have lost 2 goals to New Zealand, because New Zealand were not a particularly good side. We scored 5 against them, but we lost 2. So I had a big part to play in it. So I was devastated not to get the nod for that game, but obviously delighted at the time to play against Brazil and then Russia. But that's probably the two issues that I had with Jock, in terms of selection, was the Israel game and then the New Zealand game, which hurt me quite badly at the time.
We're all very familiar with Scottish hard luck stories and coming so close. I mean, going out in goal difference, that must be incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely. And we managed to do it in the next World Cup as well, where we had opportunities, but you are playing against Brazil, and I don't really think in the World Cup that anybody expects Scotland to beat Brazil. Did we do okay? Well, we did okay in the first half, but then it kind of disintegrated in the second half, and we lost the 4 goals. And then you go up against Russia, who all these Balkan states that you hear about now, well, that was just a culmination, and they were all playing in the Russian side. And Russia were always a really difficult team to come up against and overcome. But we got the draw, the 2-2 draw, but yeah, frustrating to go out and goal difference, absolutely.
And the great thing is, it was you that mentioned the collision with you and Alan, and that means I don't have to bring it up and you don't have to get annoyed at me for doing so. So since you brought it up, how do you reflect on that? What are your sort of memories of it?
Unfortunately, me and Alan just couldn't play together. It had to be one or the other, because I think we were just too similar. And Alan played a totally different style from me. At Liverpool, they played zonal. At Aberdeen, I played with a centre back, and I, played both sides. So it was just different ways of playing the game, and I think that showed in the times that we did, come together. And we did come together that night, that's for sure. But it's really difficult when you don't have one that's going to be the dominant centre back, in my mind. And Alan didn't want to be the dominant centre back, so in the game I had to become the dominant centre back. Hence the collision, because I was going to be the one that was going to be first there, winning headers. We didn't want to. I didn't want to particularly play zonal. We were both right-footed as well, so it didn't really. It wasn't a match that was made anywhere near heaven, and eventually, we had that collision. It played an impact, but it had an impact. There was other issues in the qualifying campaign that had the impact. The goals against being one of them, and I don't think we played, in many games thereafter together. And Alec came into the scene, Alec McLeish, and that was a much more pleasant experience.
I suppose that highlights the importance of partnerships in football, doesn't it? Relationships, because it's all very well and good having 2 individually very talented footballers, but there's a team element to this where things have to blend and mix well.
Absolutely, you've got to get that. It's. I think it's okay asking a player to play out of position or in a different formation, but are you really getting 100% out of them? Good players can maybe give it 95%, but then that 5% can be the difference. And I think what you've got to look at as a manager is, yes, get your good players in the team, but also it's got to be a team, and there's got to be understanding there as well. And it's an issue that all managers come up against when they've got good players or they've got 2 players playing in the same position. The current manager has got that dilemma just now as well. What do you do with it? You try to get both of them in the team, but really there's only one position that they both like playing, and it was the same with me. There was only one position that I like playing. I like playing with a centre back, with a big centre half, and that's how I played out my career, both domestically and internationally.
Now sadly we miss out on qualification in '84, but fast forwarding to '86 then, putting a group with Spain, Iceland and Wales, suppose, the outstanding moments, the victory over Spain. I mean, talk us through that. You still see the footage, it's out there, and it's great to watch. What was it like to be involved in?
Yeah, well, I mean, when you come up against, just think about the four nations that you're talking about as well. How difficult is that to qualify out of? So you're going to have a tough section. Spain, difficult one, but to beat them 2-0 at Hampden, was a real boost for us. So that kind of gives you the
3-1 game. So
3-1
Johnson and Dalglish obviously scores the famous goal.
Well, there you go. I've got to really kind of cast my mind back and think about it. Here's me thinking it was 2-0, but it was 3-1.
You got the margin of victory, right? That's okay. I don't mind that.
But to beat them, to beat them in any occasion, Spain, you're talking about a performance that has got to be of a high level to beat Spain. Even back then, I don't think they had the same quality of player, but it wasn't far off the quality that they've got nowadays. I think we only lost 1-0 over in Spain as well, which was a really difficult tie. I remember that one probably more because defensively you had to be, on your toes and alert, and to escape. And I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was 1-0 over in Spain. But then again, we get ourselves into a situation where we've got to go down to Cardiff and take something from that game against Wales, against Russian Hughes, two top quality strikers. So you're talking about qualification in these days for the Euros was just about impossible because of the amount of teams that were in the finals. World Cup actually gave you a better chance, but still coming up against Iceland, Spain and Wales.
I mean, that night obviously is overshadowed by the tragedy, and we will touch on that, but in terms of does that take away from what you remember about the match itself? Because it's easy to focus on the events afterwards. What do you remember about the actual game itself in Cardiff?
Well, I remember going behind, in the game, so we're 1-0 down, and then we get the penalty. Yeah, and then it's David Cooper that takes a penalty and slots it away. I remember Jim Leighton coming off at half-time. There was a big kind of a conversation in the dressing room at half-time when Jim was struggling. He took a knock just before half-time, and pass backs, he wasn't dealing with the pass backs. He couldn't see the ball properly. We thought he had concussion. But at half-time we found out that one of his contact lenses had come out. And I'd played with Jim for a number of years and I didn't know that he wore contact lenses. I don't think his manager knew that he wore contact lenses either, Alec Ferguson, who was there too. So most of half-time was taken up with the goalkeeper situation. But we had a cool, calm character, Alan Ruff, to come on and play the second half. And of course a penalty when Davy Cooper had to take it to get the draw, which was so vital to us. But you couldn't rely on a better person to finish it, and the Cooper man. So he did what we all thought he would do, and it gave us the opportunity then to play in a playoff against Australia, which we took care of as well.
In terms of the tragedy that unfolds afterwards, we've spoken to Alex McLeish and Roy Aitken in this podcast. What do you remember about how it unfolded and I suppose how you look back on that evening? Well,
at the time, as it was getting towards the end of the game, we realised that there was some issue in the dugout, but we didn't know what it was. And you've got the blinkers on, the red mist is down, you're trying to guide the nation to a World Cup, so you're focused on the job in hand. The job in hand is to make sure that you get the result and not lose anything towards the end of the game. But you did realise that there was something happening in the dugout at the time. And it wasn't until we get into the dressing room or up the tunnel, I think it was Ernie Walker. It was Ernie Walker or David Will, I'm not 100% sure, that came to me and said to me that Jock had collapsed and he was receiving treatment. So we didn't know, how bad it was, but you have that kind of a celebration that, you know you've got a real chance of qualifying for a World Cup. But then when you hit the corridor getting into the dressing room, everything's deflated. Now when you get into the dressing room, and you know, you've got to keep it down, because we get the news, and when the SFA officials come in and give you that news, then you know that there's something serious going on. But it took a little bit of time, as I remember, for the news to come through that, you know, Jock had died, and then of course it's just
Football
doesn't
put
matter.
into perspective, doesn't it? Yeah.
Doesn't matter, you know. The whole place is deflated. The fans are deflated, you know. And a moment that should be one of celebration, you're in one of mourning. So it was a really difficult night.
And the harsh reality of football is that things do move on, and Sir Alex comes in and takes over the team going into the World Cup. What was it like then to have him as your manager at club and country? You must have been asked this a million times, but how do you sum him up?
Well, you know, it was fine, and you're right. You know, it's like life. Football is just like life. You have a tragedy, you've got to deal with that tragedy, and then you've got to move on. And you know, you've got fixtures to fulfil, and you get your club manager now as your international manager. So of course, I'm fine with that, because he knows me and he knows what I can give him, and I think he knows that he can trust that I'm going to give him everything that I've got, and that's what I try to do. And you know, he comes in and, you know, guides us through the playoff and guides us to Mexico.
Do you have the same relationship with him at club and country, or do you notice differences because of the different nature of the role that he's performing at that time?
It's different, because I think he had to be different. You know, in a club environment, he was quite strict. He had a lot of young players as well that he always kept in line, made sure that they toed the line. When you go into international, there still is players there that you need to make sure they toe the line. Believe me, it's Scotland, remember, but they're not young and inexperienced. You know, they're senior players. They're playing at a high level. They're, you know, playing for big clubs as well. So he had to change a little bit in terms of his approach to these players. But it was the same Alec Ferguson. It was the same drive. It was the same will to win. You know, the same tactics, what he was looking for out his team as well. So, no, I enjoyed the time that he was, a short time that he was manager, and obviously going to a World Cup. You can't get anything better in your international career. Building
up to that World Cup then, I mean, I know there was a lot of media coverage about, you know, the scheduling, there was withdrawals, we obviously had the tragedy surrounding Jock Stein. How do you think that affected the players, and yourself obviously included, building up to that tournament?
It didn't affect me, you know, one little bit, because you know, you play in a World Cup final, you don't let anything affect you, I don't think. You know, there were, Kenny Douglas didn't go for his own reasons. I think that was disappointing, because, you know, Kenny was a really top player and a well-respected player within the squad. So that was disappointing. But it's a World Cup, you know, you go there, you represent your country, you want to do as good as you possibly can. You want to qualify. That was the main target, is qualifying out of the group. You know, but again, we didn't manage to do it. So, you know, although you get there and you play, and I played in the 3 games, and the last game in particular was hugely disappointing, because the chance was there for us to get qualified and at Scotland, and somehow we managed to find a way not to be able to take on 10 men and overcome them. And you go out again at the stage where everybody's looking for you to go into the next stage, and that would have been a great achievement, getting to out the group stages in the World Cup. What about the nature of that match though? Obviously very sort of high-tempered, the sending off early on, a few tactics later on in the Uruguay side of things that I'm sure you guys weren't happy with. What do you remember about that? Well, it was the rules are the same in football, but they were interpreted different in these days. And the physical side of it was a big part, and obviously, you know, Uruguay getting a man sent off, and Gordon's taken out, you know, in the first 5 minutes of the game. They obviously targeted Gordon, and the tactic was to make sure, by hook or by crook, he didn't have an influence. But they had the player sent off, and then, you know, for the next 80 odd minutes we couldn't score, which was quite incredible. I know that they had the tactics, time wasting, fouling and all that, and that was allowed more in these days by the referee. But you should still be good enough. You should still be good enough to overcome 10 men and get one goal. And we didn't. I think we only had a couple of chances. I don't remember having too many chances in the game. So you've got to hand it to Uruguay. They were well organised, and they defended well, and they used whatever tactics that they could to keep us out. And unfortunately, they succeeded.
In terms of that tournament environment, because what happens on the field is one side of it, but of course there's a whole other side of it, and I've noticed over the years, players talking about the sort of remoteness of the hotel, perhaps a bit of boredom, not knowing what to do with the spare time if there's not a lot on offer. What about that side of things?
Well, it was quite a long trip because we went to the States to acclimatise beforehand as well. So I can't remember how long we were away for, but we were away for a fair amount of time. But I felt that Alec Ferguson, Walter Smith, Archie was there as well. Andy Roxburgh was there too in a minor capacity. But I thought they actually did as good a job as possible to keep us occupied. It wasn't particularly strict when we went over to the States. We did have time off, to see the sights. We did have, the odd night where we could enjoy each other's company.
Sure you did.
And we did. So, it was okay for me. I'm slightly different from maybe, the Mo Johnsons, Charlie Nicholas of this world. These guys are kind of active all the time. I was quite happy to have time off and time to relax and focus. But I felt, and I know some players were feeling that, maybe the hotel wasn't the right standard, although I didn't think it was that bad. Where the hotel was out in the Aztec pyramids, although the Aztec pyramids were great to see. I really enjoyed that. A bit of culture, but
see, maybe not everyone's not as cultured as you. Maybe that's the problem.
Maybe it is. But I know some of the lads were kind of a little bit, bored with the length of the time and the fact of the isolation. But for goodness sake, we've been 20 years, we haven't been, qualified for a major championship. What do you think these players would give to get the chance to be bored in a World Cup finals or a European Championship finals? I'm sure they would give quite a lot for that experience.
That's what I was going to say, because when I'm listening to you go through the details of the frustration of not qualifying and the antics of the Uruguay players and all the rest of it, you must still look back on being involved in a World Cup like that with a huge amount of pride.
Oh, it's fabulous, yeah. I mean, I think if you had went through your career, having not played in a major championship, then you'd be hugely disappointed. And as I said, the Euros were always really, really difficult to qualify from. It was the top handful of teams that were playing in the finals in these days. The World Cup kind of gave you a bit more of a chance, and we were successful prior. I mean, I was involved in qualification games after for Italy as well, and I was for Argentina. I was one of the standbys. So, you're talking about 4 World Cups. Yeah, it's quite a lengthy time. But the actual World Cup itself, it's a great experience. It's an experience that I feel for the players, the Scottish players nowadays that haven't had the opportunity to go and savour it. You would give anything to do that. I don't think the boredom comes into it. You've got to be able to cope with that. I think maybe the modern day player is better equipped to cope with that nowadays than perhaps they were in my day. But magnificent environment that you play in. You get the opportunity to play against the best players in the world, the best nations in the world as well. And as a player, you've always got to challenge yourself. You've got to challenge yourself to be better. You've got to challenge yourself up against the best players in the world. And, if you do that, you've got a chance. If you're frightened from that, then you shouldn't be in the game. And when you get the opportunity, go and take it and savour it. And try to remember it when you're my age.
Well, I mean, as the saying goes, all good things come to an end. Your final match for Scotland ends in injury. Is that a frustration? Is it a bit of a sore one to see the Scotland career end that way, or do you take a more philosophical view of it all.
Yeah. It was coming to the end of my international career. I had played in, I can't remember. It was maybe 3 or 4 perhaps of the qualifying games up till that point. But I had the feeling, with Andy Roxburgh and Craig Brown, that they want to introduce younger players. A wee bit like now, you see the younger players getting the chance. Well, there comes a time where you've got to then take that on board and give, the fresh faces an opportunity. But if you're needed as an experienced player, as I was for that game, then you're happy to take that opportunity. So I kind of a look on it that way, because I don't know if I would have been part of the squad to go to Italy, even though I had played. But it was a bit part, kind of a cameo role that I was playing. But it was important, and that's why I got the nod for the Norway game. It was the experience that Andy was looking for. He was looking for somebody to go in there and make sure we didn't lose a game, because you didn't lose a game, you're qualified. And when I went off, we were winning, by the way. And then they lost a goal, so it ended up 1-1. But it was fine. Qualification was there, and I was delighted to play my part. I was gutted, obviously, with the injury. My last 2 games ever were at Hampden. I played the Norway game, then I came back in a League Cup game against Queen's Park the next season, and that told me it was time to hang up the boots.
Not a bad stage to finish on, to be fair, at the National Stadium. I suppose it maybe means different things to different players. Some people, it's the debut is the most significant game. Maybe it was a qualification game that sealed your progression. Do you have one standout game that you say, that was it, that was my absolute highlight in a Scotland shirt?
I think so, yeah. I mean, the 2 World Cups have, obviously play a huge part, but the England game down at Wembley when we won 1-0 was the game that really kind of give me the opportunity to put myself in the same bracket. Having played for Aberdeen, knowing that you're not really looked upon as a serious player, coming through and doing what we did with Aberdeen, but going down to London, to go down to Wembley and the big stage against these huge names of British football, and not lose a goal, and win the game 1-0, and that really put myself on the map as a serious international footballer. And that was a game really that I felt turned my career from being one that he's okay to being one that could be relied upon and could be captain of your country.
When we had Roy Aitken on this podcast, we asked him who was the best Scotland player he played alongside, and being so polite as he is, he rhymed off about 55 guys who were all really great players. I'm hoping you're going to take a more harsh approach and try and come up with one name. I know that's on the spot, but the best you played alongside.
Dalglish. Kenny Dalglish. I think Kenny was the best that I played with. There was many, and I could, ream them all off. But if you're asking me to pick out one as a standout, it would be Kenny Dalglish.
What was so special about him then?
I just think he was a special talent, special player. His personality was fabulous as well. He was good off the field. He was a good leader of men. He had a very dry wit, but his real talent was on the pitch when he. In fact, I played here, and he had a testimonial game as well, wasn't it, for his 100th cap, and that says it all. You get 100 caps for Scotland. It's a magnificent achievement. He had everything that a player needed. He could control the ball. He had a special talent in front of goals. At times, he was maybe miscried at international level. But for me, playing with him, you just knew that the football brain was of the highest order. Having played against the best in the world, the Michel Platinis, the Zicos, and you see a talent. Eden Hazard that I watched the other night there. Well, Dalglish is up there in that class and that quality.
Like you say, you're still very much involved in terms of watching the national team regularly. So I guess that maybe gives you a lot of time for reflection. Overall, just to finish us off, how do you reflect on your Scotland career?
Well, it's something that you dream about, and you hear that with international players. You, as a kid, you're coming through, you're just wanting to play the game. You're wanting to play it at a level. You dream about playing it at the top level. You hope that you can, play in a World Cup final. So to get 65 caps, bearing in mind, me being an Aberdeen player for 20 years, I think the next Aberdeen player at that time was maybe Martin Buchan, who had about 20 caps. You weren't expected with a provincial club to get many caps. So I think I kind of broke the mould a little bit. I get 65, then Big Alec with 76, and then Jim Leighton with 91. But reflecting my career, it was a dream career. Doing what I did with Aberdeen, captain Aberdeen for such a long time, getting the opportunity to play for Scotland, qualifying for World Cups, playing with some magnificent players and playing against world-class players, captaining my country, which was, a lot of pride was put in from me and my family. So it was a dream, and one that came true.
On that note, Willie, thank you so much for sharing your memories. Hopefully you've enjoyed it as much as I have, listening to Willie's stories, and don't forget to subscribe to the official Scotland podcast. Until next time.